Ukrainian armed forces conducted an air assault close to Pokrovsk, probably to alleviate the situation there. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened along the front lines and behind them in the SITREP about the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainians suffered another major air assault by the Russians in the night to the 30th of October. The Russians used 653 drones of the Shahid type, 4 Kinshal, 5 Iskander-M, 8 caliber, 30 Kh-101, as well as 2 Kh-59 or 69. Ukraine says they managed to intercept 623 out of 705 of these flying munitions, among them 592 drones, 7 caliber, 1 Iskander-K, 21 Kh-101, as well as 2 Kh-59-69. 16 missiles as well as 63 drones hit 20 targets. Fragments hit another 19 positions. The Ukrainians struck back. They hit the Mariinsky oil refinery, the Novopasky oil refinery in Ulyanovsk, and the Budyonsky natural gas facility. The Ukrainians also hit the Oriol power plant with a Neptune missile, and a pipeline in Moscow that is used by the Russian armed forces was also hit. We'll switch to the developments along the front line, and here we start off at Sumy, where we have geolocations of the Ukrainian forces in the eastern part of Kostyantynivka in Sumy. This is up here, and we can see this is here in this direction. The Ukrainians have reached this. So likely Kostyantynivka is at the very least now contested, if not retaken by the Ukrainians. That's it from Sumy. We switch to the Kharkiv-Vovchansk area, and here we have the Ukrainian soldiers reporting that it's getting more difficult for the Russians to advance as the trees in the area have now lost their leaves. Also, the recent attacks on the reservoir in Russia has helped the Ukrainians as Russian logistics took damage and the flooding has impeded the resupply there. There are also videos of Russian trenches having filled up with water, so the attack on this reservoir helped take off some pressure from the Ukrainians in this direction. But that was it from the Kharkiv direction, nothing from Veliki Burluk, so we switch to the Kupiansk direction, and here we have the Russians operating inside of Kupiansk at various points. We have them geolocated at this point here, at this point, and at this point, and on the map that is here, here, and more or less here. So in this area, the Russians are visually confirmed of having operated. To which degree they've consolidated or not is unclear, but it shows that the Russians are operating further and further inside of the previously Ukrainian-controlled territory. The Russians also claiming, the Russian Defense Ministry here is claiming that they took Sadove. This is down here. Now, this would be a disaster. Let's not kid ourselves. If they were to take Sadove, then the Ukrainian bridgehead on the other side of the Oskil would be close to being cut off. Sadove is the likely point where the Ukrainians use bridges to cross over to the other side. But as of now, there's no proof whatsoever. It's possible that a single Russian soldier or 2 or 3 infiltrators have crossed further south. We have them operating here, and from there to Sadove is only 4 kilometers. That's a distance that Russian infiltrators have previously used and have previously advanced into Ukrainian-held territory, but that Sadove is under Russian control, as the Ministry of Defense of the Russians is claiming is, as from what I've seen, is fantasy, at least as of now. That's it from the Kupiansk direction, nothing in the Borova direction. In the Lyman direction, we have the Russians once again geolocated on the eastern outskirts of Lyman itself, of the town of Lyman. This is here in this area. We recently had the Russians operating here. This shows that they keep operating in this direction. The Ukrainians have been geolocated inside of Yampil, here at these positions. So Ukrainians are operating in here. That does not mean they have fully liberated it, they have consolidated control, but it shows that they are doing local counterattacks inside of Yampil. To which degree they are successful cannot be said simply from these geolocations. The Ukrainians are also reporting that they see a lot of Russian bomber drones likely to supply infiltration units, as those bomber drones do not drop actual munitions but are flying further, so there must be a sizable infiltration attempt continuing there that is resupplied from the air. That was it north of the river Siversky Donetsk. In the Siversky direction itself, we have the Russians west of Vimka. This is geolocated here at this point on the map that is here. To which degree, again, the Russians have consolidated cannot be said. The Russians have been spotted in this rough area several times in the past, so to which degree this is now contested or not cannot be said, but we have once again Russian presence confirmed there. Further south in the Kostyantynivka direction, we have the Russians close to the town of Ivanivka, here, Ivanopilia. This is geolocated at this point here. This is a fortification that can even be seen here on Google Maps, and recently the Russians were still shelling it, indicating that it was still under Ukrainian control, and we have the pro-Ukrainian deep state map also indicating that it was under Ukrainian control. Now there's a Russian soldier in it, so that position was likely taken by the Russians. Further to the west, we have the Russians inside of Kostyantynivka once again. This is a fresh geolocation. Again, that does not mean they have consolidated at this point here, but we do continue to see Russian presence inside of the southeastern parts of Kostyantynivka, where, according to the Ukrainians, 5,000 civilians are still remaining in this town, even though that seems exceedingly high. Further south, the Russians have continued to attack Ukrainian positions, and they are quite remarkable, as we do have positions south of the mine that is northwest of Toretsk. We have that here geolocated at this point. So this is the mine here, and Ukrainian position is being attacked at this point here. This is more or less at this point, and there was another explosion further to the southeast that was likely a Russian strike on a Ukrainian position in the outskirts of Toretsk. Still, so theoretically not confirmed, but there's a possibility that Ukrainians are still operating here, where, as we can see, the pro-Ukrainian deep state map still says it's contested and not fully under Russian control. That was it from the Kostyantynivka direction. In the Dobropilia direction, we have the Russians visually confirmed in Volodymyrivka. Here. In the center of Volodymyrivka, recently the Russians did a lot of mechanized attacks in this direction, and now they likely have been successful. Not only do we now have visual evidence of Russian soldiers in there, also the pro-Ukrainian, analyst Konstantin Mashovets, a former colonel in the Ukrainian armed forces, confirmed that Volodymyrivka has fallen to the Russians. The Russians also the Russians also struck Ukrainian positions close by here. With 15 gliding bombs, they struck positions directly east of Volodymyrivka, so at least recently Ukrainians were still here. Obviously, these glide bombs, the effect of them, to which effect it had on the Ukrainian positions there, cannot be seen from a video alone. In the Pokrovsk direction, we have the Ukrainians in Rodynske. This is geolocated here. Ukrainians in the eastern part of Rodynske, where they're being struck. So Rodynske seems to likely be fully back under Ukrainian control. This is obviously important for the lines of communication into Mirnograd and Pokrovsk. Further south, we have the Russians in northern Pokrovsk now being confirmed. This year, as you can see, they basically reached the northeastern outskirts of Pokrovsk itself. We have them also in the center of Pokrovsk at the rail yard, very close to them, and we have them in the eastern part of Pokrovsk itself. So on the map, this is Russian positions more or less here, and somewhere down here, showing that the Russians are basically operating almost everywhere over Pokrovsk as of now. The Russians have also continue to keep the pressure up against the Ukrainians. And this is being reported by Ukrainian publications. And here they are saying that even the drone pilots of the Ukrainians now have to fight as infantry because of the deep infiltration of the Russian soldiers inside of Pokrovsk itself. And the Russians are advancing from Mirnograd, according to one soldier, with T-90Ms. So that would indicate that they would already control Mirnograd, even though I have no confirmation of this. Interesting, though, is that we see have reports and then have a video according to which there was an air assault by the GUR, the Ukrainian Military Intelligence Special Forces. There is a video showing a helicopter on a field and soldiers running from it in various directions. As we can see, they were disembarking here. This is basically all we know as so far. There's a claim that this was geolocated here, which would indicate that it was meant to basically keep the lines of communication open, to push the Russians back locally. This is, the video itself should be from the Russian side. So, yeah, the Ukrainians obviously are not going to tell us in regard to a currently happening operation what they are actually planning, what they're actually doing, but it seems that it's true that the Ukrainians did an air assault here in this direction, likely to either open up lines of communications again or to push the Russians back to allow for a withdrawal. We have to see that. So far, not too many details. There are already claims that they've all been wiped out. I'm not convinced by the video footage supposedly proving this. The Russian Ministry of Defense is claiming they shot down a helicopter and all 11 special forces on board were killed. I have yet to see a video evidence of this as well. So as of now, we do not know much. But in the past, for instance, in Severodonetsk, in Avdiivka, when the city fell, the GUR special forces were also employed to allow a withdrawal of the Ukrainians from that pocket there. So whether that is the parallel, whether they are now being employed there to allow for a withdrawal or not, will have to be seen. We'll have to see over the coming days. According to reports, Budanov is personally at Pokrovsk to command the operations, so he's likely not being here, but he must be at a headquarters fairly close to the front line to command it from there. This shows that the Ukrainians are now acknowledging the severity of the situation in Pokrovsk and Mirnograd from the pocket there. That was it from the Pokrovsk direction. In the Pokrovsk direction, we have this is here. We have the Russians in Novo Oleksandrivka, which is up here, and we have them in Vishneve. In both cases, it's possible that the Russians have taken the town. Not fully confirmed yet, but likely both towns were taken by the Russians, which would then indicate that the Russians have advanced up to here and up to here. As said, not fully confirmed. We have visual evidence of the Russians in there, but that, as we all know by now, does not necessarily mean that the Russians have consolidated control and that there is no more Ukrainian infantry in this direction. Further south in the Huliapole direction, the Russians have entered Krasnohirske. We have that geolocated as well. At this point here, Krasnohirske is likely taken by the Russians, so the Russians are further consolidating their positions towards the Yunchu River. That was it with territorial changes. The overview: the Russians keep advancing more or less in the Pokrovsk-Huliapole direction. This is clearly a sideshow for the Ukrainians right now, according to what Ukrainian soldiers are reporting as well and analysts. So there are not enough reserves to push back Russian infiltrations. The Russians are losing a lot of men trying to advance, trying to do infiltrations. But if the infiltration is successful, if Russian soldiers have reached a new position, then there is hardly any Ukrainian infantry to push them back out. And this allows them to constantly advance in this direction, even though very likely at a high plateau. toll in loss of life. This here is mostly static. The Russians have redeployed towards Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, and here, as we can say, this looks like it might be the end game, but then again, we've seen it in other positions that the Russians might be able to not take the city for months. In past experiences, Bakhmut would be one example. The Ukrainians insisted on keeping up the fight despite a comparable situation, so we'll have to see in the end whether or not the Ukrainians are withdrawing. I wouldn't be too surprised if the Ukrainians would withdraw from that pocket within the next few days, but at the same time, this is no guarantee that it's actually going to happen, especially with GUR even using air assaults in this direction. In the agent, sabotage, etc. Field, we have the GUR likely killing the GUR killing a Russian lieutenant colonel from Omon. He was wanted by the Ukrainians for war crimes in February and March of 2022, close to Kiev. He was killed deep inside of Russia with a car bomb. In Germany, a German Russian was sentenced to 6 years in prison for espionage and attempted sabotage for Russia. He fought for a pro-Russian militia in 2014 as well and was now sentenced to 6 years in prison. The Russians are creating reserves units to protect their infrastructure. According to the reports, 15 days of military training and the promise that they're not going to be deployed to Ukraine. We'll obviously have to see whether or not this is going to be held up. And then we have the British Ministry of Defense reporting that basically the Russians are militarizing their whole society. We've talked about it a lot in the past already. Now kindergarten is being introduced with military training. Now obviously this does not mean the Russians are going to use child soldiers. Some might interpret this this way. This is not to be expected, but this means that the Russian youth from now on, and this is already happening for quite a number of years, is increasingly being led towards the military, being taught in a militaristic way, and thus being much more willing to fight and ultimately die for Russia, as the whole education system is now reorienting itself in this direction. And this obviously also means that if Russia invests into this for children in kindergartens, then obviously they do that 10-15 years before they can be used as soldiers itself, and that shows the horizon in regards to time where the Russians are planning right now. So the Russians want to be able to keep waging war for the coming decades if they feel the need to. International support, we have the Pentagon confirming signing off on Tomahawks for Ukraine. Now, this only means that the Pentagon said we can give Ukraine some, but that's still important. We had that discussion in the past where the Pentagon said that they need their air defense for themselves, which has actually some valid arguments. But in this regard, the Pentagon said, yeah, we can give some Tomahawks to Ukraine. This means it's still going to remain Trump's decision whether or not they're going to be sent. But now at least the option is officially on the table from the side of the military itself. And then we have international support in other regards. We now have the first visual confirmation of the B-1 Centauro in Ukraine. This is a wheeled tank destroyer with a 105mm cannon. It's probably more or less being used for indirect fire. I cannot see the Ukrainians using it much in reconnaissance duty or anti-tank duty for that. It's also like even tanks are falling easy victim, and it doesn't have the armor to do that, but still it means additional firepower and additional armored vehicles for the Ukrainians. And this is basically the same here. We have a train filled with IFVs and command APCs and command variants from the Italians on a train station, likely on its way to Ukraine itself. Or to Ukraine as well. And that was it for today's SITREP. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have something to add. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.